Welcome to the inaugural Roots, Culture, Heritage and Decolonisation Week. It is a festival of ideas that we wish to implement annually, and we wish to thank all the co-constructors for being of service to the community and of service. That's my space. Yes, sir. Just press the button on the side. Yes, sir. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so in the space last night we had a beautiful event. Black Athena isn't here. I'm actually waiting for her. She has a camera. She records the whole session, but it's okay. So we're waiting for to remind them. They went to the toilet and when they return, I guess we're gonna start the conversation. And yeah, I will ask whoever to go first, and we would like to ask the panelists to sit up in front. Our 5 panelists is Miss Annelize Kotze. She's currently working at Iziko Museums in the culture and identity space. She's curating that on behalf of the Iziko Museums. So she's in the space to contribute her perspective. And Dr. Kasibe is also, let's put it, yeah, he has expertise in decolonizing museums, and he's been working in that space, and he's contributed to the fees struggle 10 years ago, and he's documented it, and he has his own praxis and perspective. He's also been writing regarding the work Annelize does with removing the bones from repositories in heritage and museum institutions and giving them actually a proper burial, as there's still bones in the repositories and must be tracked down, fetched, and it should be given a rite of passage, and heal, because I don't think the spirits and the souls are really happy or being, their bones being stuck in the. Anyway, Dr. Usher was kept maybe a month or something ago. Congratulations. I think level of work it goes. So please, Masixole, it's not a thing about titles. It's just like, yeah, even you are a doctor. We soon will be titling you also doctor, and the struggles and the mental health that goes with it. So Dr. Gamedze wrote a beautiful paper regarding Adwa, Menelek. He actually starts the paper with a piece about Salt River, and then he goes into anti-colonial narratives, black radicalism, international black radicalism, and the nuances of what Adwa really represents. And then in the paper they also deal with the ethnic politics of Ethiopia and the different narratives. But he's in the space within his capacity as also someone that participated in Fees Must Fall 10 years ago. He's been contributing to spaces with teaching history and doing cultural work. He's also been strongly involved in the Palestine cause. He's also having his own discourse to contribute. And then we also have Mr. Dr. Masixole Mlandu. Am I pronouncing your surname? Yes, Mlandu, Dr. Mlandu. Also a hero of Fees Must Fall. Has his own praxis, has his own journey in the space. And we are honoring, each and every one. So he's currently doing his master's. He's a decolonial scholar, enthusiast, grappling with decolonial decoloniality, yeah, and the different schools even within decolonial thought. So he will be contributing his perspective to the space. So if I missed anybody, apologies, Miss Patricia. Unfortunately, there was a change, so I didn't get the bio of the madam. The other lady unfortunately is going through some challenges. So the Tusimane Wana, can you help me please? What Tusimane Wanawake? Yeah, it's a Swahili expression, and I trust that she will unpack that. And yeah, so we're here to deal with Congo. What's currently maybe happening in Congo? It's 100 years of Lumumba. It's also with reflection on the Berlin conference called the Congo Conference. Last night Isaiah went into how Congo and suffered for Africa because of copper, because of rubber, and how rubber, gave Europe industries and all of that. So she will be giving her perspective and on the entanglements. So yeah, we're doing a decolonial discussion regarding those entanglements, and I trust we will have a wealth of insights and which will benefit us and the conversation going forward. So we want to get the show rolling, because we maybe want to give some of the students in here and the researchers in here a space to do Q&A. Comrade PJ last night said he's been so stuck in research, he's doing hip-hop. Are you doing your masters in hip-hop UWs? Pardon? Sociolinguistics of hip-hop. So he said he's been not involved in the space, but last night he got so much research out of the space. It's like, it's better than sitting behind, let's say, books and tabs on your PC. Anyway, so I would like to invite the speakers to come and sit in front. I don't know if I've missed anything in the introduction. Well, so this is we are all co-constructors, and it's through an ecosystem that we are able to deliver this project, and we all take credit for it, and we give thanks for all of our panelists for engaging with us and engaging with the space, and offering themselves as resources to us for this conversation. So can our panelists please come and take a seat?
Okay. Let's use the mic. Oh, it's too big. Oh, there's a code. Okay, my name is Patricia, and I don't know if I have to give my bio. I've been in South Africa since 1998, and the main reason, looking for the job, and I managed to get one. I teach. I'm a school principal, and I lead a group of women through skills training, and we do the sewing, and I've been doing this for 10 years, and I'm a part of an organization called Lip Science and Med School, where I've been a principal, and busy with students, busy with the community, and so on. And I'm here in the capacity of Tusimame Wanawake, which is a movement in Africa Unite. We stand for the right of migrants. We stand for the right of women. We believe that women can play a big role in society, and we join the women in the world to do good. We believe that we can do a lot wherever we find ourselves. So Tusimame Wanawake has been there for 3 years, and we do helping women in different ways, connecting them with other organizations, working with gender-based violence, working in terms of helping them find jobs, income generation, and so on. Yeah. So if we have to go in all about Congo, Congo is a big country in Africa, I will say like that. This morning I was following a video and a child was saying that Congo is heaven in Africa. You don't worry, Congo is heaven. And he was saying it with so much passion. Yeah, Congo is heaven. Despite everything that is going in Congo right now, it's still in heaven. And somebody else will say South Africa is heaven. Yeah, despite everything that is going there, South Africa is heaven. Look at what we're doing right now here. When we're going deep in the past, thinking of what happened in the past, and trying our best to find the beauty of what was in the past so that we can build the future. Bring it to our children and bring it to the future generation. So if we're talking about colonization, the big figure in the history of Congo, the main player that I will talk about is Patrice Emery Lumumba. And that is a big actor of that time because he played a very big role in the colonization or decolonization of Congo. So he was born in 1925, so it's 100 years of, if he was alive, he's supposed to be 100 years. So when I saw that in the document advertising this, I was so impressed and I was like, wow, 100 years already. And Patrice Emery Lumumba was the first democratically elected Prime Minister of the Republic of Congo. And he was the figure in the country's struggle for independence. He was born from a farmer's family. So his father was working in a farmer's place. I don't know how I can put it. The father was working to a Belgian guy who was a farmer. So that's what I mean. And he worked as a postal clerk and a BSL man before he went to politics. And he helped found the movement National Congolais, which was a very popular political party, and that movement led him to become the president of that movement. He was also, he came from a small ethnic group, and he gained so many people to be part of his party. Why am I saying this? Because when you have too many tribes, you have the tendency of people to go to the tribe, to the person who belongs to their tribes. So him, even though his ethnic was too small, he managed to have so many people to be part of his political party. Patrice Emery Lumumba became the first minister in 1960, but his leadership was cut short when he was assassinated in 1961. So that's the big man. And talking about him and looking at what is happening right in Congo, when I was going through the history, I was so absorbed with what is going now compared to what was going in the past. And if you look at what is going now, it's mostly of the things that he was fighting. He didn't want Congo to be depending mostly on European side. He said that we could be autonomous, we could do it by ourselves, and which make him less popular on the other side, and people could not like it. And another thing he said, and this made him less popular, he said that, just imagine somebody who was not aligned to give a speech on the day of independence and put himself on the list or came in front and started giving a speech. And this is what he has to say to the people who were there. He said, the independence that you are talking about, you didn't give us independence. We get our independence ourselves. We fought for it. We lost our brothers. We cried. Our blood went down for this independence. You didn't give it us for free. It's our independence. We get it with force. And people were not happy with that. And from there, you can imagine what came next. So, and today, just excuse me, I need to drink some water. Today, the country is still fighting for independence, I will say. I started by saying that Congo is heaven. Why people are saying Congo is heaven? Because of what it has. The minerals that you found in Congo. And they always say whenever you have your cell phone in your hands, you have Congo in your hands. Can you imagine? So those things bring people to fight so that they can have it and let Congo be. Now, Congo cannot just be. Enough is enough. We had a president. If I was talking about Lumumba, you cannot talk about Lumumba without talking about President Mobutu. I don't know if you know Mobutu. I thought I'm going to talk for 5 minutes. It's getting to 6 minutes already, I'm sure. So you cannot talk about Lumumba without talking about Mobutu. Mobutu was part of Lumumba's party. And in my reading, Mobutu was sent to Table Round in Belgium so that they can discuss the independence. And when Mobutu went there, Mobutu was also eloquent. What is eloquent in English? Eloquent, somebody who speaks very well. So that in French, eloquent. Mobutu was very eloquent, just like the president of his party, Lumumba. So there were two eloquent people. So Mobutu was so well spoken that when he went to the conference, he won the thing that they wanted to have Congo's independence. He won it. So Mobutu also managed to have his connection there. And when he came back not long ago, and it was a coup d'etat, and then it took over. And he was also part of the assassination of Lumumba. And then when he took over, he was on power for 32 years. And it was a dictator. Now, when Kabila came in, Kabila didn't come alone. He came with the army from Rwanda. And there were some, how you call it again, how you say it, there were some arrangement about the mining in the east of Congo. And then after some time, Kabila passed, and then his son took over. Again, there were those arrangements. Up to now, the new president is not happy of all those arrangements that they made. Enough is enough. We have to change and move on and free Congo. So that's why we have those fights that we're having in Congo right now. And it's too fresh, and people are still fighting even now. There is the European, how do you say European? English is not easy. Eh? Special after hours. You know? After hours, yes, sure. So that's what is going in Congo. And yeah, I'm sure you've seen some stuff here and there. So I will stop there, and I will leave some stuff for questions. Thank you so much.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you, Ma'am Patricia, for the last presentation. And I think the situation in Congo really grounds us in the contemporary moment. I think both in terms of one of the urgent political questions of today, both for the people in Congo and the people in Congo in South Africa, and the horrendous question of xenophobia and Afrophobia, which I think is one of the major questions that we have to deal with in this country. And yeah, the Pan-Africanist dream requires us that we deal with this question head on. So Hein invited me to speak today to give a shortened version of a paper that a friend and myself wrote a few years ago. Was 130 years since the Battle of Adwa. Does everyone know about the Battle of Adwa? Okay. Does anyone want to, does anyone who does want to quickly share about 30 seconds or so about what Adwa was? The Battle of Adwa. That was great, thank you. I mean, that's Hein basically said everything that I'm going to say, so but I think that he's captured the importance of Adwa as a military victory and something that defended a sovereign African country at a time that the rest of the continent was under colonial attack. And so basically there was an Ethiopian journal that was doing a special issue on 130 years since Adwa and commemorating and reflecting on it. So a friend of mine, Semene Ayelu, who's a radical scholar from Addis Ababa, we thought about doing something on Adwa that would reflect on what it means today and reflect on the various kinds of meanings that it's had and continues to have. And what we found is in a lot of the scholarship, there was only glorification of what Adwa was, and we were wondering, is there a way to kind of complexify this conversation? Like, what did Adwa mean in multiple different kinds of ways? So basically what we were interested in doing is thinking about the importance of Adwa at two different levels related to each other. The one being what Hein alluded to in relation to broader Pan-Africanist struggles across the world, what Adwa meant for black struggles for freedom. And we also wanted to somewhat think about it in relation to what it meant within the expansion and consolidation of the Ethiopian empire. And I think this took us to some details and things that are maybe uncomfortable in some way, because there's a way in which a lot of the time we want our heroes to just be heroes, you know. And I think some of what we wanted to think about is, just in a more complex way, what did Adwa mean? And so I think what we're really interested in, the kind of heart of the question, is the relationship between what Pan-Africanism became in many ways, which after the independence of African countries largely became confined to nation-state politics and an arena in which male heads of state were the main players, and the relationship between what more of what Patricia is speaking about, which is a grassroots movement, often but women and men, so yeah, these are some of, I think, the stakes of this conversation. What is Pan-Africanism? What is Pan-Africanism today? So to try to get at this, I'm basically going to try and speak briefly about three moments. Firstly, Adwa and the aftermath. Secondly, the 1935 Italian invasion of Ethiopia. And third, the creation of the African unity, which took place in 1963. Sorry, this mic is cutting out every now and again, so I'm just trying to figure out the cable. Are we together so far? Okay, cool. So, like Hein mentioned, one of the major impacts of Adwa was that Ethiopia became visible internationally to black people. Again, at a time when, after the Berlin Conference, Europeans had cut up the African continent and were taking over lands, practically enslaving people, and within this moment, Ethiopia became visible through Adwa, and through that, a vision of emancipation became thinkable. So Adwa became a symbol of Ethiopia, which became a symbol of hope, of possibility, an example of black freedom in an anti-black world, and one of the impacts of that is that the imagination of freedom became linked to a nation state. I would argue that's one of the important kind of implications, is that the imperial nation state of Ethiopia became the horizon of black freedom, and that's important in many ways. And in the first Pan-African Congress in 1900, Abyssinia, along with Haiti and Liberia, were recalled as these symbols of black hope and freedom. And in this document, there was an appeal to the great powers of the world to defend these independent black states. And that brings me to the second moment I wanted to speak about, which is in 1935, Italy under Mussolini invaded Ethiopia, which was sorry, let me take some water as well. Which was in contravention of the League of Nations, to which both Italy and Ethiopia belonged. And so there was supposed to be some kind of reprisal from the rest of the member states of that body, but they basically didn't intervene in that moment. But the important thing about this moment in 1935 is that it comes 50 years after the victory at Adwa, after the seed of independence and the symbol of Ethiopia had been circulating around the black world. And this moment in 1935 then becomes a site of organizing, of solidarity, of epic proportions. And people organized events, from baking, from cake sales to fundraising gigs, to a whole range of other kinds of events. People donated their money, and some people even signed up to go and fight the Italians. And so it became this major inflection point as new collectives and new organizations were formed, which organized not only in relation to Ethiopia, but organized around local and other international struggles. And it was the seed of Adwa in the consciousness and imagination that allowed this current event of the Italian invasion again of Ethiopia to become to catalyze Pan-Africanist organizing in that time. Are we still together? Yeah, cool. Welcome to those who've just come to the cipher. Okay, so the third event that I wanted to speak about was the founding of the OAU. So the OAU is the Organization of African Unity. Now we have the AU. And the OAU was, well, the form of the AU was essentially a compromise between two positions. I mean, I'm making it very, very, very crude at this level, but for our purposes here, this is the main thing that I want to get across. So in 1963, this is in the wake of many African countries achieving independence. from the late 50s into the early 60s, and there was a question on the table of what is the future of the African continent? How do we want to relate to each other? And crucially in that conversation is, what do we do with these borders that we've inherited from colonialism, right? And so there was basically two positions, and this is again amongst male heads of state, this debate that's taking place. So excludes large parts of the population. So the two positions were the Monrovia group, which basically wanted a form of gradual economic integration and forms of cooperation to basically keep intact the existing countries. And the groups that constituted that bloc were Ethiopia, the majority of the Francophone countries, Liberia. The more radical position was put forward by a group called the Casablanca Group, which was headed by Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana. There was also Guinea, Algeria, and Egypt in that group. And Casablanca was moving for an African federation. So the point was to erase the borders that we've inherited and establish a united federation of Africa. Something I think that is still on the table for us today, should be at least. Eventually the Casablanca position was defeated, and the current form, what we have in the OAU is basically reflects that compromise. So the OAU was founded in 1963 in Addis Ababa, and I think that was a significant moment in the question of the future of the continent and how we're going to relate to each other as people who share ancestors, people whose ancestors were moving around all the time, and people who share a destiny. So I'm going to try and wrap up really quick, but what I've tried to kind of suggest, and through some of these points, is raise the question of the nation state, and what options there are for a radically different version or vision of Pan-Africanism. And if we look at the major issues in our society today, xenophobia, femicide, capitalist exploitation, increasing forms of ethno-nationalism, Pan-Africanism needs a response to these major issues and questions, and we have to ask serious questions about the limits of, I think, the nation state and a vision of Pan-Africanism that sets its sights there. And I mean, I think the example of organizing that Patricia shared with us before is the form of Pan-Africanism that we need to return to.
Thank you, comrades. I must say that I feel much provoked by the questions that Asha sort of brings into the table, precisely because it sort of is closer to the kind of research project that I've been thinking about, particularly around not only Pan-Africanism, but African nationalism as a higher force that transcends tribal lines. And when Mom Patricia spoke about Patrice Lumumba, I was reminded again, Patrice Lumumba was an African nationalist. You know, the ability to transcend tribal lines only was invoked on the shared historical experience that the African people have, their faith, their destiny, and their history of oppression as the constitutive element of our identity moving forward. So it's kind of interesting how theoretically we have not been laboring so much on the implications of this concept or theoretical concept on how it answers to the contemporary moments of xenophobia, ethnic issues, even internally in here in occupied Azania, whether between Namaxhosa, Mazulu, and all of these things, or even between the colored community and the so-called black community, and the kind of intertensions, you know. So it would be interesting. So I wanted, like, maybe let's debate this thing now, but I'm not here. I'm not invited on that capacity. I'm invited to sing about roads must fall and fears must fall, and signs and symbolism and statues that we have torn down after 10 years. So igama lami nguMasixole Mlandu. Can you please put a timer for me so that I can speak? Yeah. I'm not a doctor. It's not that I have problems around the title of doctorship, but I don't want to be accused in some media that I've claimed a qualification that I don't have. So for now, we accept the aspirations of being a doctor. And thank you, Ma'am Patricia, for sharing the Congo story. And also just to pay tribute even to the Sudan situation. It's quite interesting in South Africa, even if we're not a country that is actually in war. By war, I mean invaded with tanks, bullets flying in and out. But we're registering a high number of deaths every day, and it's quite alarming than countries that are actually in war. So even the idea of war, we must really rethink about it in the context of colonialism as understood as an unjust war, you know, to the African people. And perhaps what Adwa, you know, symbolizes in some kind of way is the consistent refusal of the African people on the untenable right of over territory. That there's no clique of people who in any way can just mushroom out of the blue and think that they have a right, an exclusive right over the right over territory. And this is the basics of all of our struggle. You know, the question of land, the question of space, you know, it's not only that's just a question of minerals in Congo, you know, it is also a, you know, a question of the spiritual and ideological differences of how we interpret a nation. The land to us is not only just to feed us, to eat from it, you know, it occupies a bigger meaning outside of the physical Lockean idea of land must be productive in relation to the capitalist system. I mean, we know for a reason that, you know, land to us, we bury those we love, you know, when in our perspective, when a child is born, we cut the umbilical cord and bury it down beneath the land to symbolize the relationship between the subject and the land, you know. So this is not just purely for minerals, and for Europe it might be, for us it's home, yeah. So we have to just think about it. So we were involved in, I think, one of the biggest movements in post-1994, post-apartheid society. But one of the interesting things, and I kept on asking this thing, was everyone accused us of, why are you so obsessed with statues? I mean, you could have dealt with so many things. Black people are sleeping homelessly in the streets. You are not angered about that. 34 people died in Marikana, you know. All we had was a new political party, you know, that spoke about land expropriation without compensation, a whole wave. We danced and protested next to Parliament. In Tunisia, it took one person to burn themselves down. The next thing, you had an entire Arab Spring. So what is it that about the statue that suddenly, when humanity decides to throw poo into an object, everyone is outraged? People who never cared about workers, how are you subjecting the workers to clean over your poo? You know? Other people, how are you pissing off at the history, the shared history of our country? Again, back to the notion of the nation and nation building. Whose country? What country? So it was quite confusing, but what interests me, how people are moved in so way passionately than a black life who has died. English died in front of our eyes. No country was shut down. 34 miners died in Marikana. No country was shut down. But Tumani throwing a statue, a poo in a statue, everyone is upset. So we begin to think around this idea of power and symbolism, and how symbolism in South Africa, and I want to speak about South Africa, continues to reinforce, the social structural relations constructed under conquest. We don't want to admit that the African people were conquered in the unjust wars of colonialism. And what came with that was not only just the taking of land, was the mapping of the land in a different understanding, so that we don't have a particular way of speaking and imagining and thinking of that land. Port Elizabeth is London. What is, before it was Gqeberha, it was called other causes. So all of these names that are landmarks of, are not landmarks of us, are landmarks of evidence of conquest. In philosophy, I think therefore I am. Ramosi moves around. I think therefore I conquer. The fundamental relation is the question of a conquered people who are defeated in the unjust wars. And then if we are to reckon with that, the signs and symbols are a continuous reaffirmation of that social relation created under conquest. So it didn't just become a statue, it became at the core of it, the battle. Whose memory, whose history, whose land. So when Rhodes Must Fall erupted, it was as if I can use historical terms, a catalytic moment happened in the unmaking of history in the way in which we see it. 20 what years post 1994 and all these things. But what for me, I think I must bring you closer to is how the movement was not only just taking down the statue, but asking a very important question that I think the Adwa people rebellion exemplified through force, the question of justice. What do we do with those who have created our worlds upside down? Do we abandon the task to say, just because, we can argue that what happens when land is given to us tomorrow? No, we give you the land, we're sorry. We didn't mean we give you Congo back, my sister, we're sorry. But what happens to the visible and invisible scars created by the unjust practice of conquering other people? And what kinds of forms of justice do we enact in recreating another society? So when I think about 10 years after the Rhodes Must Fall, the question of justice still lingers in South Africa, because South Africa remains a country whose existence is built on the consistent humiliation of black bodies as a ritual. And we have not been able to wrestle with, changing that structure. So how do we create movements and thinking that also reinforces the idea that we might argue in all of these things, but an unjust act happened on these lands. And how do we rectify that unjust act? Tawara speaks about reappropriating bones, the Mabuela Matambo Etu. Other people speak about renaming. No. What happens to the people, the actual human beings who benefit from our misery? Is there a room to ask about, even though we know the scar can never heal, is there a room to ask a form of justice, just like we have seen the Jewish people hanging people who were prosecuting people who were in the forefront of Holocaust? where is that kind of form of justice for the indigenous people who were conquered in the unjust wars of colonialism? And I think I want to end it there. As we think about the spirit of resistance of Adwa, Haiti, and even here at home, the Battle of Isandlwane. When we think about Dingani, you know, the sign again, when you go to Pretoria, there's a Volksrechter monument. And of course, it's quite interesting. The Volksrechter monument is quite visibly there. You can see it, right? It's in your face. The rumor has it, and other people have confirmed it, that every 16th December, white Afrikaners gather in their high numbers in the Volksrechter monument. So we were lucky this other time we were in a conference in UNISA, and we had Prof. Ramoso taking us through a tour into the museum. So when you enter there, the stairs, I don't know if people have been to UCT, the stairs of UCT are sort of built in some way as if it's like a permanent marker. It's like it's difficult to remove, like similar to Egyptian walls in some kind of way. And the architecture says that, I mean, it's a marker of permanence. You know, we're here to stay. Yeah. As you move upwards, before you enter into the actual museum, there's a statue of a woman, Afrikaner woman, and there's a dedication. We dedicate this thing to the Afrikaner woman who stood there in the difficult times of the African. You see the centrality of an African woman. I mean, we might debate these things later on gender and all these things. But immediately when you enter into the museum, there's a painting. It's like a drawn, like with a coy sort of symbolism of drawing in the walls of a journey. It starts with the going into different space, the Volksrechter moving upside down. But there's a part where they meet Dingani, you know, where they meet Dingani. And then there's a small saying, we, the Afrikaners, pray that there will never be another Dingani. What does Dingani represent? He represents a humiliation of Afrikaner people who were defeated by Dingani. Esithi bulalana bathakathi. So here again, you have Adwa as this representation of how we're humiliated by the African people, that even after 50 years of the act, we still come back and wage another rebellion. But Afrikaners pray to their God to say, we pray that there will never be another African people who will embarrass in the way that they defeated us. So signs are not just signs, as we have understood it. They carry and reinforce a particular sad and deep meaning of our conquered position as a people. That when you constantly see it, there's something that has been communicated to you, that there's something about you that is incomplete. Thank you.
Okay. It would feel so hectic going after my very learned colleagues. So yeah, as I was introduced, I work at the museum. And at the museum, it's very important for us to make history palatable. It must be a history that people want to know. And it must be also a history that I feel we weren't always taught at school, and that we're not always taught at school. And I want to touch on one of the earlier colonial battles that my comrade Bradley was talking about last night, the Battle of Salt River. And I must just say that, I mean, just because I work at the museum doesn't mean I know everything, and I only learned about this battle a couple of years ago. Which, if I'm working in this heritage space, you know, and I'm surrounded by all my learned colleagues at these moments, and I didn't know about it, what about the person out there that doesn't have maybe the connections to come to places like this? You know, and I want to talk about especially, I mean, the indigenous people that were obviously attacked in 1510. And I mean, so we were taught at school basically that when Jan van Riebeeck came, magically the indigenous people appeared. You know, we were taught about him because his incorrect face was on our money. You know, that is what we were taught about Jan van Riebeeck. If we were taught about indigenous people, it was so derogatory, the way that we were taught about them. You know, I learned in primary school about the Bushmen, for example. You know, and the way you were taught about them, it was physical characteristics. You know, they look like this, they dress like this, things like that. And then as children, you know how children are, and then they'd make fun of you men, because you look like this, your hair is like this, or you were Bushman. There's nothing positive that was ever said about indigenous people. So you get taught these negative things. So now this is in the 80s, yes, I'm that old. But 2 years ago, I go into a community and I ask them, who's indigenous? No, they don't understand. Now there's one girl saying, no man, indigenous is being a Bushman. And I'm like, okay. Who's a Bushman? 2 people, 2 children put up their hands, ne? 2. And then the other children start laughing at them. Why? Because, hi, how can you say you a Bushman? It's the hair, it's the body, it's the skin color. And all of these things are now being taught as history to children. But it is not just in the schools and in places like this, it's in our homes as well. So then I want to come back to the stories that we've heard. So we've heard about the past. I mean, and how does that past then affect us today? How we feel about ourselves, how we feel about our country, how we feel about our land. And not knowing about the Battle of Salt River, all we learned then, okay, I knew about apartheid because, yeah, I saw the Caspers, I smelled the burning tires, I knew about Sophia Town and District 6 in high school. I learned about that, how their land was taken from them. You know, but we were not taught about the fighting spirit of indigenous people so many years ago. Like when they were fighting before Jan van Riebeeck even came here. You know, but we get taught that this is where it happened. These people were fighting for their land long time ago. And we need to honor that heritage and their struggle. I mean, this dude comes here, he's conquering the whole of the world. It comes from India, he's here now to Africa, he's gonna come take over here. He lands on the beach and here's the Khoi people. They're like, not today. No, not today. And they fought and they killed the captain of the ship. You know, with their cattle. I mean, the Portuguese in their diary said the cattle fought like men. Yes, there was that symbiosis with the land and the animals, you know, because this is who they were. And the dude died. They killed him. They won the battle, but these are not the stories that we get told, you know. And so growing up, we were not taught these stories. We were not taught about how our people were fighters. We knew the freedom fighters of apartheid, but not our original freedom fighters, the fighters for the land. And like if I think about myself, how I had to think about my culture and my identity and how it was derogatorily spoken about indigenous people, I didn't know that these Khoi people are the ancestors also of people like Achumau, which we were taught is Harry, the strandloper. And Harry had an amazing job. This dude escaped Robben Island. We were not taught that, you know, and that Krotoa, you know, who also had an amazing job. If I knew that this young girl was an interpreter at her age and how she had to negotiate between different countries, I mean, different peoples in the country, you know, all of this because they came here for the land, you know, but these people fought and they spoke, they negotiated, but we're not spoken about this. If I knew that Krotoa was this girl, if I knew her important job that she had, I wouldn't have felt so bad about my culture and my heritage. So I just want to say that it is very important to talk in spaces like this. But I'm here with an esteemed panel of people where I am learning about things that I did not know about. But it is also important to take it out to our communities, you know, so that especially the youth, because I mean, who's the youngest person here? I don't know. I mean, yes, okay. I mean, if discussions like this end, if we don't tell history from our perspective, from our culture and our heritage, if we're not proud in who we are and how we fought, how is this going to continue? Because we must know that with this taking of the land is taking of your identity and of your culture. You know, and with that taking away comes trauma. You know, our land has suffered, but the people has also suffered. And as much as we try and decolonize everything, we need to decolonize our minds, first of all, because when I say that, I mean, when you refer to people in certain ways, you know, like I was taught, this is how you must handle this type of person. And if I don't make a concerted effort to change that within myself, I teach that to the next generation. And in order for us for the land to heal, and for the people to heal, and for this generational trauma to also dissipate within who we are, we need to tell the stories. We need to tell these histories. Is things like Roads Must Fall or Adwa being spoken about in high schools, in primary schools? Do children know about this? Is it being spoken about in schools? So if children are not in the spaces, they won't know. You know, so this is why we need to tell our stories, we need to tell our histories. And today, like every day, we honor the struggles of our ancestors. And in doing so, we continue to unmake the colonial legacies that still affect us today. Thank you.
Just take this around the front. Sorry. So we don't get caught.
Yeah, thank you very much. Firstly, I must thank Haim for the invitation. I will not be long. I think I must make this promise. I think the other day, Masixole and his colleagues, they invited me and then they let me speak for 2 hours, like full, without any stop. And I said, I have the capacity, I can do that. There's no problem. So I want to just maybe start by, mentioning the following. Look, it's true that I have worked in the space, in the museological space, and I found that to be really quite, heavy and challenging at the same time. Because there you are dealing with silent crimes that have been committed for centuries. And these crimes are basically, have been hidden by museums in this country. I must qualify which museums, because I don't want people to go around and start, looking at museums in a different way. I refer to 2 museological forms here, only 2. I'm not saying there aren't others, 2. The Natural History Museum and Ethnographic Museums. Those are 2 museological forms against which I form my critique. Because I have come to understand that within these museums, in fact, they've become more like quiet assassins. An assassin who sits there quietly, but over and over again, this assassin keeps on, provoking the wound of a nation in a very quiet way. And people, they don't know why there's madness in the country. And the assassin is sitting there quietly, knowing that I am the cause of that pain. Now, let me then come to my second point to say, Masixole, I disagree with you. I think I like this quote from Amilcar Cabral. He argues that whenever we act in society in any political form, we must act as if we answer to our ancestors, only our ancestors, the children and the unborn. Now, Cabral is bringing to our attention the following, context to say, the reason why we are here, it is as an outcome, as a consequence of those who came before us. And therefore, we can't, there's no way that we can understand our political presence outside of the context of those who came before us. And even when we fall, at some point we'll also have to, die or move on in a different way. We will then have to pass on the baton to those who will come after us. So he's arguing that the notion of struggle, it's almost like there's a continuum of the past, present, and future. And that continuum, it plays itself out in how we understand ourselves today in the context of those who died and sacrificed their lives for us to be here today. I am saying this because the things that I'm about to say perhaps will speak to this fact. To say the notion of freedom becomes foreign as long as our ancestors' mortal remains are still locked in museological prisons, because they are there. Now, I've done my doctoral thesis just on tracking the mortal remains of people who died in battles. The battles that you speak of, your chiefs and kings, their skeletal remains were studied in museums in South Africa and overseas, North America and Europe. So, Euro-Western countries at the time, there was, of course, a global discourse which was rooted in pseudo-scientific racism, whose agenda was to locate indigenous people outside of the human family, but they had to scientificize that knowledge. They couldn't just come and say, you are subhumans. So they had to collect the so-called specimens from certain, populations on the continent. And of course, the conclusion of that scientific project was that indigenous black African people are not part and parcel of the human family. They fall outside of the category of humans, and therefore, whatever violence that we extend on them, we are not extending it on a human being, and therefore it's justified by their own, human laws. So we were then located in the lacuna between the animal world and the human world and modern human beings. So there was a gap that we were basically, categorized as the missing link, meaning that these people are subhumans who are developing into becoming real human beings. So they are not fully developed yet. And that study was done in museums. So museums at the time had to trade in human remains of African people and indigenous peoples in other parts of the world, your Australia, your New Zealand, and so forth, and the US with the Indians there. So this was then regarded as material that was then used as scientific evidence that indeed indigenous people across the world are basically subhumans because they studied our skeletal remains. And this then resulted in a whole range of violence that was extended to these people whom science uprooted or expunged from humanity, because it meant that if you read Bernard Makubane's work, Bernard Makubane argues that in fact it was the decree that was sent out or that was passed by the anthropologists, who then said to the army, no, we've actually scientificized these people, they are not human beings, and therefore you have a right to go and even dispossess them of their land, because this is land that is occupied by animals, subhumans. In fact, we're closer, according to them, to the animal world than we were to modern human beings. That's why if you went to Iziko museums of South Africa, you would find back in the early 2000s, indigenous people being displayed next to animals in a form of a diorama. So that was passing on a specific message that these people are not really part and parcel of the human race. They are closer to the animal world. And that was a very, very heavily loaded political message. But it has, of course, its other elements. We have always been close to nature. But that was then weaponized against African people. So we must then look at it, I think, from that perspective. Now, the issue now that we're dealing with is skeletal remains of African people are still in these museums today. Iziko Museums of South Africa has about more than 1,200 skeletal remains collected unethically. When I say unethically, it means that some of these bones were stolen from the graves. People who had died because they had to be collected. I was in the US in 2018 to track the skeletal remains of 5 individuals whose bones were stolen from Port Alfred. Stolen from the graves in Port Alfred. They were prisoners. And those skeletons were then donated to the Albany Museum in 1910. From 1910, the then director of the Albany Museum communicates with the then director of the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. to say, look, I have skeletal remains of 5 individuals. So under what was called a skull for a skull exchange. These 5 individuals, I call them, the Port Alfred 5. They were then shipped out of South Africa. They arrived in Washington, I think in 1912. Now, as part of the exchange between these 2 institutions, Albany Museum received about 15 Peruvian heads. So these were heads that had been collected, and the Smithsonian had these 15 heads to say, okay, we thank you for sending this. In return, here are the 15 Peruvian heads. You go to Albany now and ask them, they will tell you we have those 15 Peruvian heads. If they say they don't, I will show you invoice. Because when I was in the US, I was given in all the paperwork that accompanied the exchange. I have them. In fact, it's online. You can check my thesis there. It's not a secret. It's there in the public domain. You Google my thesis, you'll find invoice. They are listed there. 5 skeletal remains from Port Alfred. They are currently at the Smithsonian as we speak now. I took photos. You will see them. They're there. Now, then, if you go to New York, the Museum of Natural History, 18 heads of the Zulus are there. The people that we speak about here who fought in wars, some of them, when they died, their skeletal remains were cut off, their heads were cut off, boiled in water and then sent to museums to be studied and to be traded. Museums made money out of the pain of our people. You mentioned, ma'am, Patrice Lumumba. Patrice Lumumba's tooth was extracted. His body was cut into pieces and then it was put in acid. But one person took a tooth of Lumumba as a memento, as something to remember Lumumba, something as a trophy. I wrote a piece to call for the return of Patrice Lumumba's tooth. Now, this is not a small thing. This is now real politics because, our presence today, to a large extent, it's linked to the freedom of those who came before us. We can talk here on the mountaintop about freedom, but I argue that concept become foreign if our ancestors whose skeletal remains are still locked in museological prisons and cupboards. Freedom becomes a foreign concept. Up until we stand and claim and call for the return of our ancestors from those prisons of museums in South Africa and across the globalizing world. One last point. I also want to argue that museums have become colonial crime scenes. You enter into a museum that has these skeletal remains, and I want to also pose the question, can these museums become, or are museums correctors? Can they speak when they have in their collections skeletal remains of our ancestors? They have no right to speak. They must return that which they stole from our people, then they can speak. And I've argued elsewhere to say, in South Africa, perhaps we need a museum truth, restitution, and repatriation commission. This was proposed, by the way, by Zenzile a while back, but he was speaking, in the context of the TRC. The TRC was a platform that was designed for a country to face its own colonial crimes or its own apartheid crimes. Museums they managed to escape that public anger. In the same way that we're angry at apartheid, we were never angered by the presence and the crimes that had been committed by museums. They became quiet assassins. Those quiet perpetrators. And I argue that perhaps we need a revival and a movement that will call for the return of the human remains of our people. And that can in fact be articulated or presented in the context of the Museum Truth, Repatriation and Restitution Commission, where museums are taken to task by society. You go to a community now and ask them, Whether they know about the skeletal remains of their ancestors, nobody knows. It's known by few people. Even politicians, they don't know. And yet this information is there. You ask any curator here. I worked at Iziko for many years. The things that I'm saying now, I said those things whilst I was there. I wrote several articles calling for a specific dispensation that will begin to call for the return. And I want to argue that this return perhaps is one of the most missing elements in how democracy has evolved, or how it has actually, become. I think I have 1 minute here. I think I have 1 minute, Pastor. So one last thing and one last point. 1884-1885 Berlin Conference, Germany took Southwest Africa, which is now Namibia. In 1908, Lothar von Trottler, I don't know, I've even forgotten his name, he issued an extermination order that led to the flattening and the destruction of the Nama, Herero, and other, indigenous groups. Now, when people of Namibia were sent to Shark Island is a rocky surface. They couldn't do anything. Some of them died there, literally. They were sent there to die. Now, the then South African Museum, they sent their researchers to go and collect human remains from the sites of genocide in Namibia. Those skeletal remains are here. You go to the Iziko South African Museum, you'll find them there. Skeletal remains collected from a site of genocide. My time is up. Thank you very much.
Lots of big questions. It's good to be part of this discussion. I actually wanted to put one thing on the table that feels like a very urgent political question for us, and that is the notion of indigenous. And I feel at certain points people are talking past each other. Because there's a notion that some people hold of indigenous which doesn't adhere to what someone else adheres to, and there's very complex politics that get mapped onto that, and I think at some point we need to have a deep conversation about what this means, because I think we see it inflecting politics at multiple levels today, and we have to have a conversation about whose concept of indigenous and what is a politically useful concept of indigenous for us to use, and that's I feel like that's I just wanted to put that on the table. Kurt, you asked a great question about Monrovia, Casablanca, and the question of Africa Unite, and if that's a possibility given the circumstances. And also, I didn't catch your name, comrade at the back, who asked Fire. Okay, thank you. You asked a question about what if the Casablanca group would have won. Let me try and respond to these questions together. I don't know how much I can imagine what would have happened if the Casablanca group won, although I think that's an interesting exercise. But I think the questions are related, because why was it that the Monrovia group's position won, right? What were the particular kinds of relationships that, for example, the majority of the Francophone countries had with their former colonial power, France, At the time of independence, the French government was involved in so much mischief, which kind of continues to this day, where at the time of independence, a number of former African colonies of France had to basically sign away the kind of control of their budgets to the French central bank. These are relationships that continue to this day. So you see, amongst many of the people in the Monrovia group, they have very close neo-colonial ties with the colonial masters, as it were. And the project of a federated Africa would have challenged the relationships that they had, which were largely based on, extracting mineral wealth in a relationship with these colonial powers, because those resources would have been, thought of in the context of a broader African development program. Do I think it's a possibility? I mean, I think whatever radical future possibilities there are rely on us being organized in some way. So, and this relates again to this question of Agenda 2063, which is a completely top-down vision of the AU, and again, nation states who have kind of appropriated and co-opted our kind of democratic possibilities to organize and be involved in deciding the kind of factors of our daily life. And so none of these kinds of things will work to see our desires unless we are organized in a way that we are able to hold these processes to account. But so I don't think at the level of nation state heads a vision of Pan-Africanism that we desire is going to happen. But I think that at the basic level of, what the fuck do we do about the xenophobia in our society in a serious way? Like these are the urgent questions, right? And if our version of Pan-Africanism doesn't have an answer for that, then it's not going to have an answer for anything at the high level. You know what I mean? Yeah, let me pass on to whoever wants the mic.
All right, briefly, yes. Look, somebody once said, can museums become safe spaces for unsafe ideas? I wanted to think about that. Because, you see, when I started this conversation, I remember, I think I mentioned only two museological forms, because I didn't want us to think that my critique is against any form of a museological, institution. Well, when it comes to community museum, your Wandile Museum, I think these are very important projects. But I think the idea of curating a narrative, it should never be, a province of those who regard themselves as knowers, as the knower. Because that in itself is rooted in a colonial epistemological or knowledge formation. That you have this one person who's a knower, and then the rest of society are basically, recipients of that knowledge. And we've come to understand that, in fact, knowledge or knowledge production, it becomes a bi-directional process. That I could be an expert in something, but in the process of articulating my, position in society, I learn something from you, and therefore you learn from me in the same way that I learn from you. So that process has become bi-directional. So I don't stand here as a knower, but I stand here as a knower at the same time. I recognize you as a knower at the same time. So the production of museums, therefore, should be within the context of co-curating or co-production. That curators should curate narratives, working with communities, not superimposing narratives on communities. Those narratives are about the people. In fact, the people themselves, they become the main curators of those narratives. Because, in the colonial context, you would have this one anthropology. So this one curator would come and extract information from a community, and then they disappear. You will never see them again. They will give you biscuits and this and that, and then you will never see them again. And yet, the institution for which they collect the information, it enriches itself at the expense of the communities. Communities, they don't benefit anything from that narrative. So this is the kind of colonial, knowledge production that we must move away from, deliberately so. So the issue of, I don't want to spend more time, because I'm very much conscious of the fact that I have colleagues who would also like to respond to their questions. The issue of what then happens when this object, I didn't even focus on objects here. Objects is a different argument. I focus mainly on mortal remains of our ancestors, because I don't want this conversation to be, because we can talk about artifacts that were stolen. That's a very good art. That's a very important part. I wanted to focus on this one of the people who because some of these people were known in life. People who they were known in life. In fact, there's even a narrative of a racial scientist who actually ordered the skeletons of a Khoi woman when she was still alive, to say when she passes on, those skeletal remains will be mine. This is the kind of criminality we're talking about. Violations of people's human rights. So we speak here of the cries of the dead. In fact, in the African context, they are not dead, because their skeletal remains, their spirits, will always hover over where their bones are. So at the moment, we have our own ancestors who are prisoners of science, and who are here talking about freedom. What does that mean to us? We must go and free them. Then freedom will mean something to us. That's the argument I'm making here, Masixole. So last one. So last question. The issue of Hintsa's head. Hintsa was the king of the Xhosa people. His head is sent to Scotland. And then we go and ask for Hintsa's head. And stories came up to say, no, we're given the head of a woman here. This was not Hintsa's head. They done, analysis. No, this is not Hintsa's head. The circumstances under which King Hintsa died, we don't see a bullet wound on his skull, because he was shot at. So where is the bullet wound of King Hintsa? And it's the same thing. Recently, I came across with another information. The son of Maqoma, who fought in the frontier wars in the Eastern Cape, his son's name was Kona. Maqoma fought, I think he fought, I think 4 of those wars, if I'm not mistaken. They attended to Maqoma's son. The head of the attendant to Maqoma's son, Kona, is at Iziko. Now, the question is, where is Maqoma's son's human remains? If they were able to take the skeletal remains of Maqoma's attendant, we don't know where Kona's remains are. Could it be there too? So we need to do some investigation. I'm provoking you here. We must go do investigation ourselves. So what I'm doing here, I'm just a provocateur, a cultural provocateur here, provoking so that we go, when we enter these institutions, with an idea in mind that these are colonial crime scenes that must be rigorously investigated. Meaning that we are not entering into innocent spaces here. We're entering into spaces that have committed crimes against humanity. They were not forced, but willingly participated in activities that could today be regarded as crimes against humanity. And I argue that we must, as society, I think, begin to ask these uncomfortable questions about the continuing presence of these mortal remains of our ancestors today. And we must call for their return. When they are returned, my brother, they must be buried. They must be buried so that they rest in peace These are our ancestors. They must be buried so that they rest in peace. Those who were stolen from the graves, they must be returned back to where they were stolen from. Then that's where it ends. Thank you very much.
They're not just returning in peace. They must come and bring the power to the people. Because when we call them, they are there to answer us and strengthen us. That's why they must come back. So you are provoking me, actually. And many questions are being answered in my head, trying to understand why they always say that, take me home when I pass. Take me home when I pass. Wherever I will be, take me home when I pass. So, yeah, I wanted to put a small comment on somebody talking about the victory of Casablanca, something like that, what will happen, and so on. Thinking of what I was talking about, Lumumba being a rebellious, being somebody who wanted autonomy. Autonomy is wanted Congo to be autonomous, not depending on outside power. And that's something that Africa should strive on. I think somebody was talking about it here. Looking at how Africa could work together and become one. I think it's something that I think in my reading about Kwame Nkrumah, they were talking about, Gaddafi as well talking about. And I think when you're saying, imagine if there could be a victory on Casablanca. Was it Casablanca? Yeah. If there could be a victory there, by now, I'm imagining by now, we should reach already the victory of Africa being united. Because if it could happen in Morovia, is it Morovia? Yeah, if it could happen there, it means it could happen all over Africa. And if it happened, nothing could prevent it to happen now. So we should work on that as well. That's how I'm seeing things. Yeah, thank you.
Don't you want to weigh in on the museum thing? Please do to weigh in on the museum debate.
Okay, I don't disagree with my colleague. Museums were terrible. They did atrocious things. They collected people's skulls. They collected people, they dug them up and collected them, studied them, traded with them. I'm not denying that. That is what the museum did, you know. And things like what Wandile is saying is what I'm absolutely agreeing with, and I advocate for it. Hold the museum accountable. If you know, hold the museum accountable. The thing is that we're not going to keep it forever. We cannot keep it forever. We cannot keep our ancestors forever. And me, as someone personally, and this is why I'm responding, is because I do work with remains. It is my job. It is a tremendously hectic thing to do. But I'm there because I'm there for a purpose, because they were not supposed to be in boxes. They were not supposed to be in museums. So it is good to have these discussions so that museums can be held accountable. And the thing is that the museum of the past, we are the all-knowers. Because curators, don't get me wrong, the curators that I know, there's this godlike complex of we know everything. We don't know everything. If we are displaying someone's heritage and their history, who are we to say what is your heritage, history, and culture? And this is why we co-curate now. I mean, I haven't been a curator that long, but we need to be shaken up. The museums and heritage institutions, if you know that we are wrong, hold us accountable. This is the most important thing, and that is why it's important to have these questions so that we don't, I mean, not everyone is here. I'm the only person that works at the museum that's here, and I'm hearing your questions, so that tomorrow I can go back and I can put what you asked me into practice. And if your question wasn't asked, then how would I know? So that's why I'm saying hold museums accountable.
No, I don't know how to rephrase the same thing that Asha sort of proposed in this initial provocation. really, what do we mean when we speak about indigenous people? I think, and I know in some circles this is a debate. You know, it's said that Christopher is here. We can't even talk in peace as black people, to actually amongst us to say, look, you know, there are some historical issues that we are concerned with around the use of indigeneity for political gains for certain communities to score government things. But there's also a history of a people who were alienated in the face of the earth, went through all of these things. So what do we actually mean? I think maybe at a later stage we must have just on that, and maybe also on the question of how do we deal. People call it xenophobia, we call it Afrophobia, the deliberate invitation to violate another black body precisely because they were not born here. But we don't have the magnitude or the energy to violate a secular body who's white, who does not belong here. So there's something about the availability of violence to black people that we don't constantly pay attention to. And it's not only even amongst those who are not coming from here. I mean, most recently in the July unrest in South Africa when Jacob Zuma was arrested, we saw a very sad picture of the Indian community killing our people in Phoenix. Loaded guns. It was so sad, you know. And we do have those tensions amongst us as a people who, and I think Biko provides a useful conceptual framework in which to deal with some of these problems. But we have abandoned Biko and all of these things and opted for things that we don't know. So I think at some point we should have that conversation. And also a conversation about a Pan-Africanist ethos and ideas that move from the people rather than from the nation state. And in that way, we are able not only to integrate Africa, but to reinforce that African people are one and desire to be one. And I think that there's another, I was talking with Asha around my problems of African nationalism and how it's wired with modernity as well. Even the United States of Africa is not different from the idea of wanting to be part of the global arrangement of state nations. But if other people could come together on the commonality of their interest, what has stopped us as the African people to come together on the shared historical experience and the future that we want to shape under a collective ban? And I think if we are to start thinking in that way and accept that we are in this world, the belly of the beast, but how do we act on our interests as a people and as a collective in trying to overhaul the structure? In that way, Pan-Africanism still becomes relevant to deal actually with the problems that our people face on a day-to-day. You know, we were raised by people from Mozambique, our stepfathers. Those histories are buried down, you know, as if there's no exchange of what really happens on the ground, you know, between these two communities. So I think we must really speak about that. And also on your question, back to the land issue. Our relationship with land is not the physical soil as we have understood it, right? It also has to do, and the PAC has a beautiful conception of when we speak about land, what do we mean? We speak what is underneath the soil, what is on top of the soil, what is surrounding the soil. If we had the possibility, we'll even speak about the air. There are certain people who must not breathe within this air if we had the possibility of controlling it, you know. But the point is that this is a holistic understanding of the land, including its animals. We never, even on questions of naming, you know, in Southern Africa, we do know that there are people who are called Omachola, you know, loosely translated people whose clan name are based on snakes, particularly a black mamba, you know, that when there are trouble spiritually, it emerges on the bed of the people. Then we know that something has to be done spiritually to fix their homes. So snakes to us, even elephants and lions, are not creatures of fear. Just because we have been distanced from the land for a longest time, our cognitive understanding of the space has long gone and erased. And this is the violence of colonialism. Not only just to displace people, but to displace their memory of the space. That they no longer can see themselves in the space. And this is where the question of sign and symbolism comes into play. That we are not only just speaking about, we're also trying to invoke a particular memory about ourselves in the space, and the particular memory of how we understand the animals and how we have named them over time, and how they have named us. You know, just a last example around animals, you know, next to its mountain, they are always guided by a creature. Sometimes it's a monkey, sometimes it's a chicken, sometimes, depending, but an animal is always central, you know, to how we understand. It's not a thing, you know. But on the question of justice, I don't want to lie, my sister, and it's making me difficult because, you know, I have a white friend who's, you know, in the room. But the question is, why are we expected to have a higher moral ground on a situation that refuses us to be human beings? Constantly we were being asked to take, you know, the higher pitch, you know, tame this other chick. No, we don't want to be like them. Our conditions have constructed us into different animals. I said earlier on, we record the highest number of deaths, black boys killing black boys on daily in South Africa, as if we were a country in war. I would think that justice and peace would firstly require, you know, a return of the right to territory to the people who were conquered in the unjust wars of colonialism. But it also will have to do a sense of punishment to those who have committed the crimes. And if we were to see to it systematically on how that is done, reparations, paying, I don't know. But I'm not going to foreclose the possibility of an eye for an eye. I'm not gonna allow our lives to be at the center, to be at the center of death, while we accept that certain lives is more valuable than the other. Who must die and who must live? Who? If it's not us, who? Why not them? I'm not trying to be even a provocative. This is a real question. Who's that one man from Afroforum, Crane? Just last one. Crane on national television told people of our country and the leaders in parliament, you must forget about land expropriation without compensation, or else there will be a civil war. Live, it's there, you can check it on public. If you think that you will implement here land expropriation without compensation, there will be a civil war. What audacity, what creates the conditions of possibility to speak to us in that way in which we can be alienated, in ways in which you can never speak about Jews? So I don't know. I'm not trying to propose answers, but I think at the center of justice is acknowledging the kind of harm that white people as a group and a society have done to a majority of black people who are left in disarray. Congo is in disarray. Patricia Mudiayi said it's 100 years today. We are outraged. We are outraged by images of war in other countries, but when it happens at our doorsteps, no one is mobilizing us to parliament, shut down, you know, Rwanda, embassy, whatever. But, you know, for a Palestinian struggle, we'll go all the way. I'm not saying otherwise. I'm not saying struggles are important than others. Yeah, but I'm saying, whose life matters? Is it the yellow-skinned kid, or is it the black boy who's suffering in Congo? All of these lives matter. So what is then the sense of outrage when a life that is supposed to die dies on a day basis? So that's where my issue is at, like, who must die and who must live?
I think we're going to conclude, and I think we're going to keep the questions for ourselves as we continue on our own journeys, and we shall meet again, and we shall reflect again. So we give thanks for this reflection. There is always programs happening. It's Africa Day. We have an Africa Day festival in Georgeside. You should do something on the 25th of May for Africa. We have Lumumba and Fanon Day in July. We will be, so we will be occupying, given the resources, given access, because we work with zero budgets. That's our struggles to create these spaces, Apologies for giving my back to the comrades. So that's that. The cipher can go on and on. As someone working within cultural production, and to get this raw, authentic, grassroots reflection, praxis going, and we give thanks for each and every soul, each and every being in the space, for making your effort, for sacrificing your time, your energy, so that most beings can be enlightened, because I'm sure people took in. So thank you very much, everyone. I want to conclude on that note, and then I just want to make some announcements. We need to 10 to 9, if depending on let's be out of here by 10 to 9, because 9 o'clock is that's luck. So let's go. What I wanted to say is, no, because the Q&A is done, I wanted to just, you guys can cipher, share a number if you need to share a number. What I wanted to say is that tomorrow we have the screening at the Zico Museums with the Honorable Azania Rising Team, films by Mr. Adrian van Wyk and by Mr. Alderson, will be screened tomorrow, touching on Pan-African issues. There will also be a discussion, and we can pose some questions to the filmmakers within the context of the films. The films are touching on land, it's touching on working class, dispossessed youth of the Cape Flats, it's touching on artisanal mining in the Northern Cape, and it's touching on building of white supremacy institutions on stolen land, and it's touching on the agrarian struggle by African women across 3 different nation states. So that's tomorrow from 1 up until 4 at the Zico Museums. Thank you for helping us to curate this. So we are working with the museum and the curators to co-curate and decolonize Zico. She told me she wants to decolonize Zico, and she has a master's. She's also a learned comrade sitting here. So she plays the line. So I just wanted to don't be deceived. Thank you. So and then we're gonna come back here. We have bloodlines of Bushman people from the Rietfontein area, where the line was drawn between Namibia and Botswana. The clash between the Germans and the British happened. It was called Bachunaland, or something like that, and then Botswana. But okay, and that's what's happening. We will be making a fire circle with Bradlocks, our other expert and linguist. So that's happening from 6. We're sleeping here. It's something historic, right? We are decolonizing the fort, and the blood and the trauma that's here. We will be in healing and asking those spirits in pain to go home, and to be released from here, to give us more energy, in a different space. yeah, that is basically, and then we're gonna go to the Adwa Parade. It's the 10th year of the Adwa Parade in Cape Town. Our elder over there is one of the founders of the Adwa movement 2016, and Elder Kurt is also one of the founders of the Adwa movement. He did one of the first footage, edited footage content, and it has also helped to build movement. And yeah, that's also how these tools are also important to build movement. Our resources and the repositories of knowledge and thought and ideas. It's important. So thank you for allowing the community to access you guys. So that's happening tomorrow, 1 till 6, 1 till 4 at Ezekiel. Then yeah, grab something, refresh. Then at 6 we would like to, there's a group taking a pilgrimage from Genadendal. So the Verdal Philander. The Philander, if you study the Philander bloodlines, the Busters, etc. within the Rietfontein, he's a direct descendant of those. So he's on a horseback coming here, traveling. He'll be arriving on Friday, and then that's the rest of the week, and then we seal it up with the Adwa Parade from 8 o'clock up until, let's say, 1, 2 o'clock. We will be doing a parade through the city for the 10th annual year. And this is the first annual year of Roots, Culture, Heritage and Decolonization Week. So the panels and the thinking part is technically done. Tomorrow we will think regarding the films, and then we will come and do the rite, as a RITE, rite of healing, and then the parade the next day. So we're going to be sleeping here, refreshing ourselves with a cold face wash the next day, and then we are going to be going to the parade. So thank you everyone, man. I want to just thank you for making the first Roots, Culture, Heritage and Decolonization Week, the first leg of it, a success. And now we go on to the next 2 days. And I bow to everyone, you know.